Good evening, everybody. We'll begin momentarily. Just a reminder, we will have interpretation services available in Spanish, Amharic, and Arabic.
Buenas tardes, bienvenidos a todos, bienvenidos a esta reunión. Tenemos intérpretes en español, amárico y árabe. Yo me llamo María López, voy a ser su intérprete al español hoy.
ጤና ይስጥልኝ እንደምን አመሻችሁ እንኳን ደህና መጣችሁ። በስፓኒሽኛ በአማርኛና በአረብኛ የትርጉም አገልግሎት እናቀርባለን። ከታች የዓለም ሉል አለች፣ እዛ ላይ በመጫን መምረጥ ትችላላችሁ። ወይም ደግሞ ከስልካችሁ ደግሞ 3 ነጠብጣቦች አሉ ወደ በቀኝ በኩል ከላይ እዛ የቋንቋ መምረጥ ትችላላችሁ። አመሰግናለሁ።
مساء الخير بكم جميعا. الليلة معانا لو حابين ان انتوا تسمعوا الترجمة باللغة العربية بتضغطوا على الكرة الأرضية اللي بأسفل الشاشة وبتختاروا اللغة العربية. لو بتتصلوا عن طريق التليفون أو الآيباد بتختاروا من ال3 نقاط اللي موجودين على الشاشة. بعد ما بتدوسوا عليهم بتختاروا اللغة العربية وبتتجهوا إلينا. أهلا بكم.
Okay, now I'll turn it over to Ms. Elika Gulik.
Thank you and good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight to talk about the high school project. We do have some design concepts to review with you all, a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This is being recorded, just so everybody knows, so you will be able to watch it afterward on our webpage. There also should be a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And please feel free to use that to submit questions as we go through. Nobody else can see the questions you submit, so feel free to submit them as you please. And if we could get the presentation going. Okay, we can go to the agenda slide. So good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Erica Gulick. I'm the Director of Capital Programs Planning and Design with Alexandria City Public Schools. Tonight, our agenda looks short, but we have a lot to talk with you all about. We are going to do a brief introduction. We'll then be talking through some of the initial concepts that our design team has prepared. And if we have any time left, we will be able to answer some of the questions that you all submitted. We do have a meeting directly after this one at 7 p.m. with our superintendent's advisory team. So we will have to end this meeting a couple of minutes early. But we look forward to the discussion tonight. Go to the next slide. So to explain where we are right now in the process, so this is for the redesign of the Mini Howard campus. We've gone through some site planning activities over the past 2 years, including a lot of education planning activities with our school staff. And we're now in the concept development phase. So we're developing different ways the building and the site amenities could be placed at the Mini Howard campus. And then we'll continue to move through further details in schematic design, and then ultimately hoping to start construction as early as next spring. Go to the next slide, please. So we just wanted to briefly review if you participated in our community survey that was out last week from, I believe, March 2nd through March 10th. We collected a lot of feedback from that. You could see we had 216 responses. And some of the questions we asked what's important in the redevelopment of the Mini Howard campus. And from those responses, we heard capacity for our students, which that's why we're doing this project. We know our high school enrollment is growing, so that is good that we are on the same page with you all. And we also heard a need for flexible and adaptive spaces. And that's certainly something our design team has been considering as we've gone through this process. We also asked if you were designing the redevelopment of the Mini Howard campus, what features would you like to include? And we heard innovative and technology ready, as well as having collaborative and hands-on learning spaces for our students. We've listed some concepts or ideas, and the ones that the community prioritized were designing for education as well as community access. And then we also asked just what are your biggest concerns or worries, and not dissimilar to other projects that we have, traffic, noise, and safety seem to be the biggest concerns. We also had a community meeting on March 8th where we did some polling and received additional feedback. We'll be doing that tonight as well as it relates to the concepts. And so I will turn it over to Omar with, I'll turn it over to Sean with Perkins Eastman to start going through the design concepts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gulick. So I'm Sean O'Donnell. I'm the principal in charge with the design team with Perkins Eastman Architects. So we're really excited to be sharing, some initial concepts with you this evening. But before we jump into those, what I'd like to do is just set the context for the concepts, that we'll be sharing with you this evening. So a few key points, I think, as you consider these concepts. One is that while we're talking about the Minnie Howard site this evening, it's important to recognize that the Minnie Howard site is part of the Connected High School Network. So we're thinking, of course, of this site, but surrounded by all the resources of the Connected High School Network, including the King Street campus, of course, but also the satellite and other opportunities and resources that would be available to students, throughout their experience in the high school. On the right is another important issue, I think, for everybody to understand as you consider the options as well. And that primarily focuses on the fact that we're going to keep the existing Minnie Howard facility operational during the construction of the new building. So that one focuses the construction of the new facility on the eastern portion of the site, predominantly where the ball fields are, and potentially overlapping on the parking lot as well for staging and other sequence of operations for the construction of the building. So as you look at each of these options, understand that each one of them is responding to these opportunities and constraints, on the site and within the larger network. Next slide, please. As Ms. Gulick was also saying, we've done a lot of work working with the school community, and we continue to learn about the exciting programs that will be available within the Minnie Howard site and also its relationship to these other sites. But a few basic principles that will help you understand the concepts as we present them. One, we're thinking, we're designing for 1,600 students on this site, but we're also responding to many of the issues that were raised in that community survey. So for example, you see there's a dotted line, a dashed line going through here. We're organizing the building, for example, to foster active community use while also creating these collaborative, active, experiential learning environments that are part of the mission and vision of the Connected High School Network. You'll see there's different entry points, that we'll be reviewing in each concept too, that facilitate the operations, both of the schools and some of the co-located uses on the campus as well. We have generated 3 concepts that we'll be walking through this evening. And so you can see that we've given each a sort of simple name, the hand, the crescent, and the pinwheel relative to what they look like and their architectural gestures on the site. So again, an easy way to remember each of the concepts as we go forward and start the conversation around each opportunities. With that, I'm going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Omar Calderon, who's our design principal for the project.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening to talk about this very important project. So jumping right into the first concept, Sean spoke about where the building needs to be situated because we need to keep the existing Minnie Howard building in operation. The building needs to be situated on the eastern part of the site. So you can see there, that's the building location for the first concept, the hand concept. And we call it the hand because when we look at it and we squint at the shape, it looks like a hand that has a couple of fingers going in the easterly direction. And those fingers are the classroom wings. And that's very important for the sustainability aspirations of the building. We want to create classroom environments that are facing both north and south. And that actually gives us the ability to maximize daylighting opportunities in the classrooms. And that's one of the significant strategies, early on strategies we're employing to achieve the net zero energy goal that this building has. So the building is located in the east. So that means that the western part of the site, the public open space site, will have the fields. And so you see there that there's a multi-use field there on the west. There's also an area for basketball, and then also a relocated tennis court duo. They're also striped for futsal, which we understand is a growing sport of interest in the community. And so there would be adequate facilities for that. There would also, in addition to that, would be walking paths around the whole area. And so those are being partially depicted now. And we would continue to design those pedestrian networks as we were on. Then we also have bus and bus drop-off on the southern part of the site there. Because the topography, and that means the ground the building sits on, has different elevations, meaning that it's higher on the western side and it's lower on the eastern side. The building, as it sits on the ground, has the ability to have multiple entrances on multiple levels. So the arrows there in red are indicating where we are imagining entrances to be. So there would be an entrance on the east, there where the cursor is showing, and an entrance on the west, which would be facing the fields. And then on the east side, we put all of the car traffic, all the vehicular flow, car drop-off on the eastern side through a new curb cut along Braddock. And so that helps separate the buses from the cars and provides for safe pedestrian environment within the site. And then the last point I want to make about this slide is how we are somewhat future-proofing the development of the school, given that capacity and growth is an important issue for the community, as we have heard. There is a hatched area shown in the plan where one can imagine a small addition being placed in the future in case the school needs that space for its operations. Next. So this is the massing of that concept, the hand concept. And by massing, we mean it's the general shape and volume of the building. So you can see that there is an indication of where windows may be, but we're not at that level of detail yet. So we're still talking about the bulk and the massing of the building. And so as a result, it's we think it's going to be a 4-story building on one side, but by virtue of the terrain, how it elevates as you go west, it'll be 3 stories on the western side. So 3 stories on one side, 4 stories on the other. Then we have the physical education spaces are on the west side, and we like that idea because then they would be facing the fields, and so placing the gymnasium and the planning of a pool within the building facing the outdoor physical education spaces makes some sense from a planning point of view. So as I said earlier, the learning neighborhoods have classrooms facing north and south, which helps facilitate daylight harvesting and ensuring that we get closer to our net zero energy goal. Physical education spaces are placed to the west with convenient access to the fields. The heart of the school, which is this idea that Sean showed us at the beginning of his talk, it's an important aspect of the learning environment in that it helps connect all of the learning spaces in the school. And it has things like dining areas and support services for the students as part of that. And then with this concept, there's a 3-sided courtyard that becomes part of the entry for the school. And that actually frames the idea of indoor-outdoor connectivity, which is another important suggestion we heard from you all at the last meeting. creating spaces where one can feel connected to the outdoors. Next. So this is a summary of some images of other buildings that we find interesting that may resonate with the same idea that's being espoused by the hand concept. And I like to think of this concept as a building that is composed of parts. So rather than seeing one big thing, we're seeing smaller parts or smaller buildings that happen to be connected together. And that's an important aspect because I think that helps us control and design for scale so that we create a building that fits in its surroundings as a good civic building. And so you see some examples in here of other buildings that achieve this by the use of the parts. You can see in number 1 there where the building has the repetition of these parts, creating these 2 building elements that happen to be connected by this third thing that happens in between it. And that third thing can become very glassy, very open, connected to the outdoor and connected to the courtyard in the center of the site. So we want to seek your reaction on this first concept, and you'll have the same opportunity on the next 2 concepts that we want to show you. And we want you to evaluate them through the lens of the massing, the bulk and the massing. How do you react to the massing that is being presented here? The second aspect is pedestrian and vehicular flow. How well does this concept resonate with you in how it handles the vehicular movements around the site and the pedestrian movements around the site? And then the third question is outdoor. It has to do with outdoor space, open space, and how well does this concept help you understand how well the building's going to fit in its site and how well it manages outdoor spaces surrounding it. So we'll leave the questions up on the screen for a few minutes to give you an opportunity to answer those. Okay, so the question has now disappeared and we see some results. Here, we're getting 61% on the like and some neutrality, and liking the pedestrian and vehicular connectivity, vast majority there, 2/3 majority, and open space. Great. So we thank you all for your participation in that, and we appreciate your feedback. So we are moving on to the second idea, which we call the crescent concept. And we do that, we call it so because in this concept, the classroom wings are distributed primarily along the south side of the building. So if my lovely assistant could maybe point to where the classrooms are on the southern side. Yes, so that whole wing is classrooms. So there are some classrooms on the north side, but primarily the building is a classroom building along the south side. And so that shape of the building, that bending of the building reminds us of a crescent shape. And so that's why we called it such. Now, with this concept, the building does get a little bit longer in the east-west direction. And so it begins to reduce the amount of site available on the east side for parking. As you can see there, we have parking on the east side, that's the west, but on the east side, yes. We have some parking and then a vehicular drop-off with a turnaround zone at the top of the site that leads to a service area. And the service area is tucked in on a part of the site that we can screen it from view so that it's completely concealed and not detrimental to the appearance of the building or the operations of the building. So along the east side where it says library, the library is it's a moment in the building where it's actually on a second floor spanning over the courtyard. So it's creating a bit of a gateway, if you will, entrance to the building. So we have a little courtyard space that becomes a point of entry at the lower part of the site. And then from the west side, where the surface parking is, we have another entry. So we can enter the building like we did before in the first concept from two sides. We also make use of the bus drop-off here. And one thing to remember about this idea is that it uses the existing curb cut that is present in the site. And it provides for a one-way counterclockwise loop so that the buses are always picking up and dropping off to the right-hand side of the bus. So it's really the safest possible way for the bus to operate. But then it uses the existing curb cut that is at the school on the western side of the site for exiting. And that allows the buses to be able to do a left turn or do a right turn. So it maximizes the flexibility for the buses for maneuverability while using existing curb cuts that are there on the site. Then you can see the athletic fields and the tennis and futsal. And it would be the intention of the design team to also include basketball courts into here and also have the additional pedestrian network of paths around all of the fields as well. So that idea would also be present in here. Then you can see on all the way on the east side, we have room for a modest school expansion, maybe not as big as was present in the first concept we shared with you, but still about 13,000 square feet of floor plate area. So if you multiply that times 4, it amounts to something in excess of 40,000 square feet for a building addition there. Let's move on to the next. So this is the massing that view that results from that concept. So you can see that it's still a 4-story building along Braddock Road there on the left-hand side. The media center, which is the library, is that volume you see on the right-hand side, and it acts as a kind of gateway into that courtyard within. And so that actually has the capacity of being a highly visible element, illustrating the importance of a library, perhaps to the program, but also in a interesting way, kind of deferring back and pointing back towards the existing high school. I don't want to use T.C. Williams. I know that there's some rethinking on that going on, but kind of pointing back to the existing high school as a way to remain visually connected to it. Right, and that's kind of an important aspect of this design, symbolical gesture to connecting back to the other building on the campus. So we still maximize daylight opportunities like we did before. That's kind of a constant in all concepts. And really this media center and the creation of this outdoor space in the form of a courtyard become the distinctive features of this idea. Here's some images of some of our own work that we've done elsewhere and some of the work of others that illustrate, in some cases, this crescent shape idea for a civic building. Also, the idea of a gateway, using parts of the building as a kind of gateway into itself, like the image on number 2 there. And then some other images of courtyards that we felt were interesting to put in relationship to what we're hoping to achieve here. The bottom of the page shows a diagrammatic section illustrating the courtyard, the building relationship to the topography and the changes in elevation there, and then that elevated volume of the media center, the library, as a kind of place that you go through as a gateway. So now it's time for us to receive your feedback on this particular concept. And so the same questions apply. We want you to think about the massing and how well it resonates with you or how it does not. And also reflect on the vehicular and pedestrian mobility and movements around the site. and how well you think this particular concept satisfies that. And then the third aspect related to open space. We'll leave those questions there on the screen for a moment, give you a chance to participate and give us your feedback. Great. And here comes the results. So we are seeing some likes, but a little more distribution in the responses here. Now 50% on the like, 46% on the second concept, and the idea of pedestrian vehicular access, and then open space, 42, 29, and 29. Thank you very much for your participation. As always, we appreciate the feedback. And so now we can move on to the third idea we wanted to show you, which is the pinwheel concept. And we call it a pinwheel because it felt to us that what we were creating here is almost like a center space, a communal center space, and then the other major spaces were kind of gravitating and rotating around this. So you see the classroom wings and the gymnasium and the pool sort of gravitating around this central space. That gives us an opportunity to have entrances on the south side there, and also that entrance, I would add that it would also face the east side where the drop-off is located, and then another entrance on the west that's coming from the bus car loop. Now, you can see that in this one, we explore a little different shape for the bus loop. It's a shape that uses the same curb cut that exists today, but reorganizes that surface to have the buses kind of stack up there and wait for the students in the afternoon. As we were learning about the operations of the school, we think that there may be some other things that we can do to this area to make it even safer. But this provides for the ability for the buses to pick up and drop off, as I described earlier, on the right-hand side, and then have the students go directly into the school, right? So there's a really great direct connectivity, if you will, between the drop-off there and the school entrance. And then the other parking areas on the east side are for cars and staff members. And so you can see that there's two zones. One is placed along the east, and then another one along the back of the building on the north side. And then that with a little road access to service there. And as we learn more about what the school needs to sit on the site and operate, there's things like stormwater management features that are part of the regulatory entities that are requiring us to have. There's ample areas in this concept for those elements on the site to take place. And if you don't know what I mean by that, that there's going to be on-grade areas where the building is going to be shedding water from the roof, and that water is going to be absorbed into vegetated zones that are part of the landscaping treatments of the grounds of the school. There's also a modest area for school expansion, again, thinking about the future of the school and the potential for adding at some time in the future if it is needed. Then on the west side of the property, we see the familiar athletic fields, a little more definition on the path, the pedestrian network around the field, so that there is a measured walking area for pedestrians to exercise, a basketball court, a half basketball court there, and a little play space, which we are identifying as a potential add to the program. Almost like a little playground where even 3- and 4-year-olds can have a place to recreate in this open space. Okay, so we will move on to the next slide, which we talk a little bit about the massing. And so you can see that in massing, the pinwheel becomes a little more compact of a footprint. And that is, I think, by virtue of the fact that we are going to a 5th level on one of the wings. So you can see there in the foreground that that part of the building, just that part, becomes 5 levels. It's at the center of the site, so it's in the furthest point from either Braddock or from the neighbors to the north. And so the impact would not be as perceived from those 2 locations. And then the gymnasium is also facing the west side where the athletic fields are. There is a modest courtyard on the west that serves as a point of entry facing the fields. And then, of course, the pavilion in the foreground, which is part of the main entry there from the parking. And these are some images of some projects. Again, some are projects. Some of the other images are projects of others, but we felt that they reminded us of the forms that we were generating with this concept and a potential materiality for the buildings. And I would say that with all of these concepts, one of the things that runs in the back of our minds about when we think about the potential materiality for the building is thinking about the students and thinking about their trajectory as lifelong learners, as we hope they would be, and that they're in high school now, but this is only one stop on their trajectory as I said, lifelong learners, that they're eventually going to go to college or some other form of higher learning. And this building maybe has the responsibility to aspirationally look a little bit like a building one might find in a college campus, because you're already preparing students on this pathway. And so we like that idea. We like the idea that architecture can have a role in inspiring students to continue on their journey. And so that's something that it's fair enough to maybe perhaps say in here. So here's the point where we ask you your impressions about this concept. And so the same familiar questions are going to come in the screen about the massing and your perception of it, about the pedestrian and vehicular flows around the building, and about the open space. So we'll leave that there for a few seconds, give you a chance, an opportunity to participate and give us feedback. Okay, and so here's the results. And we're seeing lots of likes, and it's trying to remember some of the results on the other ones, but it seems like this is perhaps neck to neck with the first idea that we shared with you today. So once again, we thank you again for your participation. We're going to ask you to do this one more time, I think in a couple of moments here, but this is how we, as a design team, evaluated these 3 concepts. And there's a few more criteria here than what we just asked you. And I think this will be posted, so you'll be able to examine this in a little more detail. But many of these criteria that are illustrated here have to do with the internal organization of the building. And so many of these aspects are graded as a green, meaning very well. There is one here in crescent that has a red dot having to do with parking. We felt that perhaps out of the 3 concepts, maybe that one was not solving for the parking as well as the others. And so as you examine this, just think about that criteria, think about how you felt about each scheme, and there will be an opportunity, I believe, for you to give us additional feedback in the days moving forward. So at this moment, we want to stop here and just summarize some of the three concepts that we shared with you. The hand concept, which has the two wings facing east with the three-sided courtyard. The crescent concept, which is the classroom wing along the south with the, let's call it this sort of bent-shaped building form that defers back to the high school at King Street. And then the pinwheel concept, which is the collection of, let's call them learning pavilions that are gravitating and rotating around the center there. And so we have, I believe, 3 more questions to ask you. And this is the last poll. And so we ask you to perhaps vote on which concept you think is best from a massing point of view, given what you've heard today about the massing being illustrated. The second, which one do you think performs the best from a vehicular and pedestrian access point of view, which incidentally, pedestrian connectivity is something we heard was of importance to you all at the first meeting we had with you. And then lastly, which concept do you think is best from an open space point of view? And you may have to scroll down to see all of the options there, if your screen is like my screen, to see the 3 choices. So we'll leave that on the screen a few minutes to give you an opportunity to vote. And you have also the 3 drawings there on the screen that you can use to refresh your impression on the 3 concepts. Let's see here. So we have on massing the hand concept, on vehicular and pedestrian access, the hand concept, and on open space, the pinwheel concept. Great. Very interesting results. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Azuka Bartlett from ACPS, who's going to walk us through the rest of the materials we prepared for you tonight. Azuka?
Thank you, Omar. We wanted to provide a quick update on the project budget. From the total allocation for the high school project, 150 million has been projected towards the construction cost as we prioritize the school educational programs and spaces, the teaching and learning spaces, common areas, and shared spaces such as gymnasium. They total up to $149.8 million. We are still exploring on the kind of the orange column side, some additional programs such as aquatic pool, underground parking structures, and co-located partner uses such as Teen Wellness Center and early childhood programs. These programs are currently included in the all 3 massing of the 3 concepts. However, these are not currently within the ACPS construction budget of 150 million, and we are still evaluating the uses and exploring various financing options. Next slide, please. Quick update on the project timeline. As you're aware, we're doing the educational redesign process parallel with the construction design and construction timeline. On the top half, you're seeing the educational design timeline, and they're currently in the early design process in the blue tab.
On the bottom half, you're looking at the design and construction timeline. We're as well in the early design phase that you're seeing in the purple bar. And just to give an overall goal for the project, our goal is to open the school building for September 2024 of that school year. Next slide, please. Near-term decisions. As you're aware, we've gone through some major milestones. We have gone through co-location options back in January and February. School board decided to move forward without the affordable housing co-location option. We have then worked on the comprehensive program and educational specifications document. And this document have been reviewed in February and March and been approved by the school board on March 4th, which have informed the current concepts that we are reviewing. We're anticipating the school board information session on the 3 concepts this Thursday on March 18th. And we are anticipating the school board to make a decision on one of the concepts on April 8th meeting. Next slide, please. Further engagement on the concepts. After today's meeting, we have a superintendent's advisory team meeting from 7 to 8 p.m. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a school board meeting this Thursday. We have planned for another community meeting for next Thursday on March 25th, followed by another superintendent's advisory team meeting from 7 to 8 p.m. And then we'll be looking at the April 8th decision, followed by another tentatively April 12th meeting for the superintendent's advisory team and community meetings to provide an update. Next slide, please. So as we go through these concepts, it's a lot of information and we would like your feedback. If you have any additional comments or questions, we do have comment form open. There's a QR code on the slide available, as well as there is a link that one of our teammates will put it on the chat. And then, as we mentioned, there's another community meeting coming up next Thursday. So we wanted to kind of end the presentation and address some of the questions that we have received throughout the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Azuka. So I think we have probably about 10 minutes for questions. I see we have some in the chat. So I will go ahead and get started with them. The first question, is there room for a diamond field? I think this is referring to a specific concept. So it said in the triangle area above the basketball court. I think in general, a question about whether or not there's room for a diamond field on the site. I don't know, Perkins Eastman, if maybe you could give a design perspective, and then I know someone from Rec is here.
We can maybe start the answer on that. And you know, while it looks like each of the concepts you can accommodate the diamond, that would probably be about the only thing that would fit in that space. There would be no outfield area, you know, of any sort. And that's really for 2 reasons. The first one is being that the athletic fields, because it's such a large area and it's on a part of the site where there's also a lot of topography, it's going to have to be hemmed into the topography. So the athletic fields, it's not going to necessarily be at the same elevation as that green triangle space in the corner. And so there's a level change there. So that actually presents some difficulties for creating, you know, a true sort of baseball field. But the diamond certainly would fit, but that's really about the only thing that could fit. We also, I guess as part of the programming for the site, in terms of outdoor recreation, that was not one program piece that we had talked about. It was really maximizing the use of the multi-use field, and then some of the other elements, the tennis courts and the futsal and the basketball. I don't know if anybody from Parks and Rec is present that can.
Yeah, sure. This is Jack Browen with the Department of Recreation. I think you summed it up well. Our focus here in our discussions with ACPS was to basically return the same level of programming to the site, ensure that we have a regulation size rectangular field. As was mentioned, you might be able to squeeze a diamond in, but due to the site constraints, you're not going to be able to get 2 individual athletic fields here. They would definitely overlay, which would limit the potential use, actually would limit the use to either one or the other. You wouldn't get simultaneous use. And right now, I know ACPS utilizes other diamond fields for the high school athletics, within the city, but that our intent here was to return the existing community use and ACPS use on the site and have it relocated to the other side of the property.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Omar, did you have anything else?
No, I'm good. Okay. You can go to the next one.
So we have a few questions on parking, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. So one of the questions, I think, again, specific to options, but if in general, Perkins Eastman, if you can say how many parking spaces are provided in each of the concepts. And of course, these things get refined as we go through design. So if we give you a number today, that number may very well change by a few, but in general, I think, Omar, if you can give.
Yeah. So I can speak generally about this issue because as Erica said, with each concept and with each turn of the page that we do on the site plans, we're able to adjust that number and fine tune it. But the goal is to get to as close to 200 spaces as we can. And in all of the concepts, we have in excess of 165, 170 spaces per concept. Now, I say that, but if we look at a concept like, let's say the bottom concept there, the pinwheel, there's about 165 spaces on the east side, but then the bus loop is designed so that when the buses are there, nobody's parking. But when the buses are not there, which is a big part of the day, that space is also striped to have an additional 40 or so spaces. So collectively in that concept, we would get to the 200, albeit 40 of those spaces have a timeshare arrangement, if you will, with the buses, and understanding that the buses are there for a fraction of the time in the morning, dropping off students, and then in the afternoon they have, they utilize the space as they're picking them up to then take them on their routes.
Thanks, Omar. And then related, do we know, or does anybody from the team know how many parking spaces we currently have at Minnehaha?
I was looking at the survey data here offline, and the survey data is not good on that number, so I can't. So we'll have to take that question offline, Erica, if we could, and then get back to that.
Sure.
To that neighbor on that answer.
Yeah, and all of these questions too, like we said, the meeting will be recorded and posted. We do have to do some captioning, so it will take potentially a couple days to get it posted. And then also the questions, we will collect all of those questions, and if needed, we'll make any updates to the webpage as well. Another question related to parking: has underground parking been eliminated as an option? So I'll start to speak to this, and then if anybody wants to jump in. For those of you following the Douglas MacArthur project, or just in general, you may know that underground parking is much more expensive than surface parking. And so we determined that, well, in each of these options, Perkins Eastman does have separate iterations where potentially underground parking could be pursued. At this time, we don't think that that is within our budget to be able to afford. And given that we do have the site area to develop surface parking, those are the options that we're showing now. We don't want to present the school board with options that are not within the budget. And so currently we are planning for this above grade parking. That's not to say in the future, and you'll notice in a lot of these that the potential for school future expansion for the school, if we need it for more enrollment growth, could be in the where we have shown the parking lot, and then we may need to pursue underground parking at that time. So I would say it has not been eliminated as an option, but it is not likely given our budget constraints, at least at this time for the project. Okay. A couple other questions. Oh, so sorry, another one from parking came in. Between King Street and Braddock sites, what is the grand total of parking spaces that are required? So required is, let's say per zoning, there's a certain amount that we need, and then per how much we actually use or realize at each of the sites is a different number. So right now, I think we have about 400 spaces in the King Street parking garage. We use that almost the entire garage for staff when not during this year, of course, but in normal times. And we also have 175 spaces for student parking at the Chinkapin Loop, which the past couple of years we have filled and even had a lottery some of those spaces. So if you do the math and add all of those up, it might be somewhere around 750 total spaces if we're proposing about 200 here. So that's what we're currently projecting as the total need. That being said, the zoning requirement is significantly lower than that, or at least somewhat lower than that, as it's a 1-to-10 ratio. So 1 space for every 10 student capacity that you have within the building. Okay, other questions? Where do you envision, and I'm not sure if we have this addressed, so again, we may need to, and we'll probably have to wrap up in a couple minutes, but just another related to kind of transportation. Where do you envision and accommodate Dash bus service? Do we know where that stop is now? Our students, we do have a great partnership where our students are able to ride the Dash buses, and I believe there is a stop close to here. I know there's one in front of the King Street campus.
Yeah.
Look at that.
We may have to look at the detail on this further as we get planning, but I think we appreciate the question because we are planning with the mindset that we want to have accessibility from all methods of mobility, including the Dash bus service, certainly walking and also bicycles as well. So we're interested in all mobility forms in and out of the site. And so we will be planning for that as we progress into the concept. But we think that there's ample room and space to accept all of those mobility forms safely in the site. I know that a concern that was raised earlier, and it's kind of showing up in some of the comments in here about pedestrian connectivity and about Vision Zero. And, you know, we certainly want zero accidents, particularly in a school environment. So we are aware of these policies, and we're examining them as they might present themselves in the planning strategies here. But we appreciate the questions and the comment and the reminder of the importance of those.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you everybody again. We are going to wrap up. I do know there are a few more questions in the Q&A chat, so we will collect those and make sure that they are either addressed at our next meeting or see if we can update the webpage to address those questions. But thank you everybody for joining us tonight. For superintendent's advisory team members who joined, please, you can go ahead and we're going to start that meeting. It's on the same account, so we do actually have to go there and end this meeting. So you can go ahead in a couple minutes and join that link. That meeting will also be recorded for the community as well, and the community can watch it. You just won't be able to submit questions or participate, but you are welcome to watch. So with that, thank you all. Have a good night. And advisory team, I'll see you on the other side.